Nice. I can paint here. Oh. Oh, okay, it's working. Just needed to check. When we started to learn CSS, everyone explained us that the basic style that we have in the browser, before writing even single line of code of CSS, is coming from the user agent style sheet. This is kind of the god of CSS. He's creating us all the basic style in the browser. Or isn't it? Let's take a look on this example. When we are doing inspect element for a div, we can really see in the inspect HTML element that the div have the property of display with the value of block. And it's really coming from the user agent style sheet. But when we are doing the same thing for a span HTML element, we are not seeing here anything. Everyone knows that the display of the span HTML element is with value of inline. But why we are not seeing here anything? This is a really good question. But before I will answer you this question, I want to talk with you about another thing. In CSS, we have a global CSS reset keywords values. These 4 keyword values you can use on any property in CSS. I'm talking about the inherit value, the initial value, the unset value, and the revert value. And let's start with the first one, the inherit value. The inherit value, like his name, can do for us inheritance. And let's see this link, and we'll do some zoom because this special screen. And as you can see here, this div with the class of box, I'm giving some style, border, background color, width, height, and margin. But for all the inner element, all those div inner element, what I'm doing here, I'm giving them width, height, margin, background color, and border with the keyword of inherit. You see inherit, 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 inherit. And in this way, I'm inheriting the parent of the styles. You see, all the style of this parent. And this is kind of amazing stuff that we can do in CSS. Now, let's continue to the next value, the initial value. Every property in CSS has initial value. Padding has initial value of 0. Margin has initial value of 0 as well. And for the position property, we have the initial value of static. This is also mean that if we will use the initial value on the padding property, it will be equal to 0. If we will use it in margin, it will be equal to 0 as well. And if we will use the initial property on the position property, it will be equal to static. But what if we will use the initial value on the display property? Maybe you are thinking that you know this answer. And maybe you are thinking that if we are doing the initial value on the display property on a div element, because the div element, the user's agent style sheet, have a value to display property of block, maybe you are thinking that the initial value in this case will be block. But wrong. If we will use the initial value on the display property on a div element, it will be equal to inline. Why is that? The initial value doesn't look on which element you are putting it on. It doesn't matter if it will be in div, span, table, it doesn't care. It doesn't look on which HTML element you are putting it on. The initial value is only connected to the property. And every property in CSS can have only one initial value. And for the display property, the initial value is inline. And how can you know what is the initial value of every one of the property in CSS? Of course, you can search it in MDN, and under the initial value category, you can see that for the display property, the initial value is inline. Okay, nice, nice. And that brings us to another point. In CSS, in the browser, we have kind of 2 levels of style. The first level of style is the initial value that every one of the property has. Every one of the property has only one initial value. But we have the second layer as well. The layers that change some of the style for some specific HTML element. And this is bringing us back why in the inspect element, when we are inspect element and div element, we are seeing the display with the value of block that is coming from the user agent style sheet. Because this is style that we have for a specific HTML element, and it's kind of overriding the initial style of the display property. And this is also the reason Why, when we are doing it for a span HTML element, we are not seeing here anything? Because you don't want to see all the initial styles of all the properties. Think about it. You have hundreds of styles, hundreds of properties, and you don't want to see them one by one written here. And you only want to see those special styles that we have for some special HTML element like div that is with display block. Nice. Then if you want to know what is different for a specific HTML element, you need to look for the user agent style sheet. This is the CSS file that overrides the initial style. All the browsers are using kind of the same user agent style sheet. And this is an example that I took from Chrome that you can see. Some HTML element, as you already know, maybe getting the display none. And because of that, you are not see them in the browser. And for the body, you can see here that it has, from the user agent style sheet, display block and margin of 8 pixels that we don't like, and a lot of time we are resetting it. And because sometimes there are differences between the user agent style sheet between Chrome, Safari, or Firefox, what we are doing sometimes is adding the third level. The third level is the normalized level that fixes the problems between the browsers. And if you want to reset more style and remove them because some of the style that we are getting from the user agent style sheet we don't want to have, in this case we will add the fourth level that is the reset level that are removing us those specific style from those specific HTML elements. Nice. And now, let's continue to the third value. Remember, we have 4 global CSS reset value. And let's talk about the very special one, the unset value. The unset value is working in a very special way. The unset value sometimes behaving like inherit if you are putting it on a property in CSS that have inheritance by default. And sometimes it's behaving like initial if you are putting it on properties that doesn't have inheritance. And maybe you are telling to yourself, what you just told us? I will try to explain you now in a more better way. I want to talk with you about 2 groups of properties that we have in CSS. In CSS, it's being divided to 2 special groups of properties, the inherit properties and the uninherited properties. Let's start with the first group. Let's talk about the group of inherit properties. In this group, we have all the typography properties, like font size, font weight, text color, line height, text shadow. Have you ever think about it that when you are putting font size for a container element, you want it to affect all the inner element? The reason that it's working in this way, that those type of properties by default have inherited. And how can you know if a property has inherited or no? Of course, all the typography property has inherited. And if you want to check one by one, of course, you can do it in MDN under the category of inherited. And you can see here that this property of font size has inherited because it's written here, yes. Okay? Nice. And now let's continue to the second group of properties. All the uninherited properties. In this group, we kind of having all the other properties that are not typography properties, like the properties of all the box model, padding, border, margin, CSS position, display, transform, animation, and many, many more. All these properties, you don't want them that they will be inherited. You don't want to give a container padding and all the inner container will get the padding. And those properties doesn't have inherited. And now this is bring us back to the unset value. The unset value is working in a very smart way. Because when you are resetting a typography property with the unset word, you want it to reset to inherit. Because when you reset a font of typography, the default is inherit. And you want to reset it in the same way that it was working before. But if you're resetting a property that doesn't have inherited by default, like the padding property, if you will use the unset value, it will be equal to initial. You see, unset on typography property will be equal to inherit, and unset value on the padding property will be equal to initial. And this is a nice way because it's doing it for you automatically. You don't need to think if you need inherit or initial. And because of that, we have the unset. But maybe you're asking me, why not just to write initial for uninherited properties and inherit for all the typography properties? Why to use this unset value that is working in a very special way? There is another reason why to use the unset value. We have a very special property in CSS that almost no web developers really know that it exists. We have the all property. The all property is like to take all the property that exists in CSS and combine them to one property that combines all the properties together. And now, if you want to reset all the properties in a specific container, you can write the property of all and give it unset, and this will automatically reset you all the properties combined. It's meaning that if you have typography properties, all the typography properties will be reset to inherit. All the other properties will be reset to initial. Instead of writing them one by one and reset every one of them, you can now write the property of all with a value of unset. And this is a really amazing way to do some changing in a specific container and to reset everything. Nice. But now you will ask me another question. When we will reset a div element and we are resetting the display property, if we are resetting it with the initial value, it will be equal to inline. And if we are resetting it with the unset value, it will be equal to inline as well, because unset is being translated to initial, that is being translated to inline. But when we are resetting the display property of a div element, we don't want it to be equal to inline. For the display property is very important for us to keep the user agent style sheet. We don't want the initial value in this specific case. What? We cannot do it? Of course we can. For that, we have the last forward keyword value, the revert value. And it's working in a very amazing way. If you are putting the revert value in the display property on a div element, it will first look if the user agent style sheet has specific style for this specific element, and if it has, it will be equal, in this case, to block. If you will put it on table, it will be equal to display table. For every element, it will be according to the user agent style sheet. But what if you are using the revert value on an element that doesn't have any user agent style sheet? What will happen? In this case, it will act like the unset value. As you can see here, if I'm putting the revert value on a font size, it will act like inherit. And if I'm putting it on a padding element, it will act like its initial. Amazing. This is doing us all this calculation in one value. Nice. But then you will ask me, wow, this is nice, but in the day-to-day job, for what? For what thing I need it? Why I need this thing? Okay, it's nice, all the CSS reset keywords, they're all property. But where I will use it in my day-to-day job? And let's talk about it. The first thing that you can do with it, you can do some tricks on people that you are working with, and you can start all the elements, write the property of all, and write inherit, and in this way, all the inner element, you are writing padding on the container, all the elements get padding. Okay? Border, everything is not working, and a lot of, you will see a lot of full stack developers are really frustrated, but let's continue to a better reason why to use it. The second reason that a lot of web designers don't like those checkboxes. They don't like to see those checkboxes. They like to design checkboxes. And we as a web developer find ugly way and hacky way to design those checkboxes. What you are doing, let me guess, you are having a checkbox, you're wrapping it with a label HTML element that affecting the sibling element, you're styling it, yikes. You don't want to work in this way. Now you can design almost any HTML form element in almost every way that you want. In this case, that I have this input with type of checkbox, I can write the property of all with the unset value. This is erasing all the style sheet of the browser, all the user agent style sheet. This is meaning that in this case, you don't see the checkbox. It has a size of 0, pixel, nothing, you cannot click on it, you cannot see it, and you cannot even know if it's checked or not checked. But now you can customize your own style and to create it in a design way. And that you will understand what I'm exactly meaning. This is another CodePen example that I created. Here you can see in the HTML only one input of checkbox. You see? Only one. And this is the checkbox. Design checkbox. This is a native checkbox, yes? A native one. I only designed it with style. And how it really works. As you can see here, first I'm removing all the style. All unset, clearing all the style. And then I'm just starting to create the style. But how I'm doing the button inside? In a very easy way. I'm using the default pseudo element. Nice. but how it's moving when it's checked. I'm just creating the check status, and the before pseudo element I'm moving with the transform property here. Oh, cute. And of course, you can have an over, focus, disable state. You can design all of them with CSS. Nice. Let's continue to our next thing. A lot of web developers love to use CSS reset, and they remove all the basic styles. Until not long ago, maybe the best way to remove all the style was with the CSS of Eric Meyer that was being created in 2007. But I don't like this huge selector, because every time that you are doing inspect element, you see all this junk of all those HTML elements in the CSS, and it's hard to debug your own code. And now, with all those new features, with all those CSS reset keywords, with the property of all, we can make a lot better CSS reset. And in my mind, I wanted to create a CSS reset just to select all the elements, to remove for them all the style with all unset. And of course, we want the display property again, because they're always removing the style of the display. And here I'm just bringing it back that we will have for div display block and for table display table. But it didn't work for me precisely as I wanted, and I kind of created my own CSS reset, and with more fixes that I think that needed to be created. And then I published this project on GitHub, and some other web developers find me some bugs, and this is a good thing, because now I can fix them, and they are being fixed. And this is a kind of a new project that I think we need in 2022. It's working in all the browser, very important to say. And this project was published to NPM, and it now have more than 2,500 downloads per week, more than 1,000 stars on GitHub, and I have this project on the NPM only because Yanai Edry was helping me to do so. And if you want to see this project and to try it, you can find it in this link on GitHub. And of course, give me a star if you like it. If you want to understand all the logic of it, you can read the interview in CSS Tricks. And I write a full article on it on Medium. And before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright. Upright is the open source Firebase alternative. I'm doing a lot of stuff on CSS. The best way to follow me is via Twitter. You can see all my other stuff in my own website. And if you want the slide, take out your smartphone and QR them with this QR code. And thank you very much for listening.